Hi, how are you? I'm Kenrick Thomas, the Director of Marketing and Communications for the United Way of St. Lucie County, and welcome to Live United. Today, I have Jeff Shearer, the CEO of Tykes and Teens, and we also have Heidi Garcia, the Director of Community-Based Care from Tykes and Teens. How's everything going?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. Now, tell us a little bit about Tykes and Teens for people who are watching who may not know.
Sure. Well, we are a community, we're a mental health organization that has been providing services for about 23 years. We have predominantly been in Martin County for most of those years, although about 4 years ago we expanded to the Treasure Coast, which included St. Lucie County. And we actually have a wide variety of mental health programming. So we have kind of traditional general mental health. We do some programming specifically for children who struggle with substance abuse issues. We have some programming specifically for more complex kids and do some specific treatment interventions for them. We have school-based services, so we're in all the schools in Martin County and in Okeechobee County. We're just beginning to expand in Indian River County to some of the schools up there as well. We do a tremendous amount of prevention programming, so we have an out-of-school suspension program. So for middle and high school students who get suspended from school, both in Martin and Indian River County, they can come to our program during the duration of their suspension with the goal of keeping kids in school. And then most recently, we started our infant mental health program, which is a program that Heidi runs, that does several different kind of in-depth interventions as well as some targeted case management.
Great. Now, how did you get involved with children's mental health?
Well, that's kind of a complex story, but essentially my mother was a clinician as well. As a child, she actually worked for an organization similar to Department of Children and Families. This was in Virginia, which is where I was born. And watching some of the work that she did was quite fascinating to me. She actually was one of the people who spearheaded a sexual abuse work group in the city of Norfolk, which is in Virginia. Back in the 70s, really, there was just a beginning of awareness of sexual abuse that had actually occurred. So watching some of her advocacy work, I'm sure, influenced me. I have an older brother who struggles significantly with mental health, and so I was a peer counselor in high school. I did telephone counseling in college. Pretty much I was going to be a therapist, and graduated pretty early, and actually started Tykes and Teens when I was about 26.
Really? 26 years old.
And have been kind of going at it ever since. We've served about 35,000 children in our 23-year history. And we do, my goal is not to just do traditional counseling, although that is important. We want to make sure that we do it in an affordable way. Our sliding scale starts at $3. So for those that are, the working people who kind of our specialty group that we do that's unique in the community is, let's say you're a bank teller and you're making $30,000 a year, but you're a single mom and have 2 children, you have health insurance, but your copay is $25 a session. Well, if you've got 2 kids that both need counseling, that's $50 a week, that's $200 a month. That really becomes unaffordable on a $30,000-year budget. But she would fit at $3 on our sliding scale. So, if you've got 2 kids at $6 a week, right, that's $24 a month versus $200 a month. That's very affordable. One of the other things that we really emphasize at our organization is quality care. So as a mental health provider, a community-based mental health provider, we are not required to have our staff be licensed. They only have to have a very broad level of oversight by a licensed individual. We actually require all of our staff either to be licensed or to be registered to be licensed, which means that they are under supervision of a licensed person. We provide a tremendous amount of training and supervision and support for our clinicians. It's interesting because the insurance for low-income families is called Medicaid, and Medicaid has the least qualified representatives providing services to what I would challenge is the most complex population. Mm-hmm. So people who are in poverty often have high degrees of trauma, have experienced a lot of negative experiences, and yet they have the least qualified individuals providing services to them. So although we could do that within our organization, we choose to kind of wrap our clinicians up so that they can provide quality care. And it costs a lot to be able to do that, so we do some fundraising to be able to support that. And actually, probably one of the things I do well is get grants and contracts to be able to kind of amplify the services we provide to those families that are in need.
That's really great. Now, what is infant mental health consultation, and how did it get started?
Well, I'll defer that to Heidi.
Yes, Heidi.
Sure.
That's her program.
So infant mental health is the program that we have that serves children ages 0 to 5 and their families. And most of the time we serve children that have experienced some type of trauma. And for the longest time, people wonder, like, how do you do therapy with a baby or a 2-year-old?
Yeah,
right?
that's a good question.
And the fact is that we are genetically wired to connect. However, based on our life experiences, our ability to do that could be shadowed by those experiences. So very young children see the world through the eyes of their caregivers. And we are born very intelligent with a big brain, but very immature. So we need caregivers, loving caregivers that can help us make sense of what happens in the world and be the buffer for our experiences. So in infant mental health, the client is not the child, is not the caregiver, is the relationship between them. So for instance, I'm going to give you an example. Babies cry when they have a need, and it is the adult's responsibility to figure out what are they trying to say through that cry. What does the baby need? Is the baby hungry, wet? What is it? And we are genetically wired to have that desire to nurture a baby and to provide for those needs. But sometimes, if we have experienced trauma, our ability to really interpret those behavioral cues in an accurate way can be shadowed by the negative experiences that we have had. So for instance, I could be a mother who experienced domestic violence, and maybe the cry of my baby could remind me of not being loved or accepted or not being competent. And instead of me engaging the baby to figure out what the baby needs, I might disengage. So through infant mental health, we help caregivers understand what are the emotional needs behind the young children's behavior and how to satisfy those emotional needs in a way that is age appropriate and that is compassionate. And we also, because we focus on the relationship, we help parents and caregivers understand what are the dynamics behind the behaviors that they exhibit and the way they feel when certain behaviors happen. Let's say children are exhibiting challenging behaviors. A very common thing is that a 2-year-old, for instance, would bite when they get angry. So very young children do not have a very big vocabulary because developmentally speaking, their brains are not ready for that yet. So the way they typically communicate their needs is through behaviors, and they would hit, bite, or cry or withdraw, and typically adults will try to figure out what that means. But depending on my experience as a child, that will define my parenting skills or my parenting style, I should say. And let's say I interpret the biting as my child being aggressive or not liking me or not wanting me. That will determine how I proceed. Let's say that instead I see, he's 2, he doesn't have enough words to make sense of those big feelings when the feelings arise, and I'm going to help that child understand, you're mad, you really wanted to play with this or with that. So basically the role of the infant mental health therapist is to help both caregivers and children navigate the complex emotional world that we live. And by focusing on the relationship, we can address the needs from the child and the needs from the caregiver. And if there has been trauma, we also have the opportunity to restore the protective shield within that relationship between that child and that caregiver.
That's great. Now, when a child is acting that way, how does a parent decipher whether it's a mental health issue or it's just a child being a child? Is
Yeah.
that something that, like, how does that work?
Well, I think it's how you use the word mental health. You know, I
Okay.
think the stigma in our society is that people deem mental health as a bad thing, that it's, and really what they're referring to as mental illness.
Mental illness.
So if you have high blood pressure, do I think of you as someone who is ill? You know, I can't see it, right? But you may take a pill to be able to do it, or you may do some techniques to be able to reduce your strategy to be able to reduce that. Mental health, all mental health is the way that we relate to the world and the way we relate to ourselves. So it is when these other external factors that interfere that can make those things greater than and become difficult to manage. So if I'm going to continue to use the metaphor with physical health, it's like going to the gym. You know, some people go to the gym in order to get healthy, right? They're morbidly obese, they need to lose 100 pounds, they have diabetes, they have high blood pressure, so they're gonna go to the gym to be able to lose the weight so that their body becomes healthier. There are some people who go to the gym because they have an injury, right? They go for rehab, right? They got knee surgery, and they're going to go back to that normal trajectory. But there are some people who go to the gym to prevent any health issues from occurring in the first place. Well, mental health is exactly the same thing. We have different degrees of interventions as it relates to it. So some people will need to go more the medical model. They'll need to see a psychiatrist or a medical provider to get on medication to be able to manage some of the chemicals in their brain that may be off. But some of us have had a significant event, and so we need the rehab, just like the person who had the knee surgery. And so we're trying to get them back onto that normal trajectory. So they've experienced a trauma, it distorts their worldview about how they see that world. We help them recognize that that was a unique experience, but not all experiences that we as humans have or that they will have throughout the rest of their life. And there's a whole element understanding about when our safety has been impacted. Our brain goes into protect mode and then sees unsafe things everywhere. Even though it may not be reality, that's how it sees it. And so as clinicians, what we do is we help them interpret it. So Heidi gave the example of the 2-year-old who's biting. So if I grew up in a domestically violent home, or my partner was domestically violent, and now my 2-year-old is biting me, I may interpret that as he is a perpetrator as well, a 2-year-old. And I've had adults come into my office to tell me that their children were evil, or that they were, that there was something seriously wrong with them, that they were going to be a perpetrator like everyone else. They misinterpret. Now the behavior is the behavior. The 2-year-old is biting. It's the meaning of that biting that we need to be able to understand. And because we may have a distorted perception, because we've had experiences that not everyone else has had, everyone will interpret that biting in a very different way. So it's like, okay, so I have the 2 kids that are arguing back and forth, as 2-year-olds could do. His frustration gets to the point where he can no longer communicate and he bites. Well, then I can understand what's going on. So how am I going to choose to respond to that? Right? This is the deficit that this child had. So I don't punish a kid or an adult who's in a wheelchair because they can't run. I don't say you're a bad, incapable human being because you cannot run. I say, oh, well, you lack that particular resource. How do I get you across the finish line? Oh, I'll put you in the wheelchair. That's how I'll do it. Well, just like I do with the 2-year-old is, how do I give him that skill set to be able to manage the conflict with his peers so that he does not have the feeling so big that he would resort to biting, and developmentally get him to the point where he will be able to speak language. That's that rehab population. And then there's a group of people that we deal with from that prevention, that as we are developing, there are normal developmental things that occur, but they can be difficult for us to manage. So one of the things we talk about is temperament. We have different temperament styles. So there are some people out in the world who are slow to warm up. It takes them a while to, they're shy. And then there are some people who are extroverts, right? They can throw them in a new situation and they're going to be, that's a temperament style. So for that shy kid, when they're going off to college for the first time, that could really be difficult for them. And they may need some preventative work. So there's nothing wrong with them. It's their temperament style. But they may need some additional support to help them get connected, to take the risk to be able to do it. The extrovert doesn't need to do that. But the extrovert could have problems managing their feelings. They may be very expressive in the way they feel, as opposed to a more blunted individual. Again, a temperament style. So I may need to help that individual be able to temper the way that they express, so that other people may really love that expressiveness, but other people are like turned off by it. So how do they read those cues to be able to know that? And again, as a clinician, that's something that we can help. And that would kind of fall more in that preventative realm. So mental health, we all have mental health. We all have a means and way we relate and the way that we manage ourselves. So there should be no shame associated with it. So behavior is an expression of our mental health.
Great.
Which is what we do when we're working with children, right? They don't have language. They can't tell us what's going on, but they have behavior.
Yes.
And we know that behavior has meaning, and it's up to us as adults to be able to interpret that behavior so that we know what's going on with those kids and we meet their needs. And one of the things I really want parents to understand is if we don't hear them the first time, they will make it bigger.
Wow.
And sometimes it will get so big that it's now disruptive. And so the sooner we're able to hear our children and hear those nonverbal behaviors, the easier that those children are able to manage. And that's our goal, right? Is we want our kids to do well. And parents who are really attuned to their kids, they often have pretty easy lives.
Great.
Whereas parents who may be struggling with their own mental health or have substance abuse issues or their own trauma history, because they've got a lot of voices already going on in their head, they're struggling reading and hearing their children. And that's part of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Now, is there a cost associated with this project to families?
So you were referring to our infant mental health consultation, which is a
Yes.
project that we do specifically in child care centers. We actually have a couple of grants that allow us to do that. That service in which we are supporting teachers and the centers themselves, we do that free of charge. Our grants are that allow us to do that. We do work, we also do a technique called child parent psychotherapy, which is an intervention we specifically do with people who are traumatized. We do a lot of work with the Department of Children and Family, and in our area it's Communities Connected for Kids, which is our privatized agency that manages that, with those families where either the children have been removed or are at risk for being removed, to be able to address that, and those are free of charge as well. So we either bill Medicaid or another source if that goes away. It's only our community kids that we have our sliding scale that I was mentioning early. So we do have the ability to take insurance, but you know, there are a lot of private practitioners out there. We're really targeting that working group of people who have insurance but cannot afford those deductibles or copays.
Great. Now, how will this project help child care centers and families?
Well, I'll refer back to Heidi.
Sure. So, childcare centers typically see a lot of kids that exhibit challenging behaviors, and we learned some time ago that the expulsion rate at childcare centers is higher than K through 12 combined. So that means that children ages 0 to 5 are being expelled from preschool when they're exhibiting very challenging behaviors, and that could be, you know, throwing chairs across classrooms, showing any type of aggressive behavior that could put themselves or another person at risk. So part of our goal is to, again, focus on what are the social emotional skills that adults are promoting within classrooms and schools and environments in general to help these children learn how to manage very strong emotions, and also to help adults identify what's the emotional need behind the behavior and what things can they do and put in place in their environment so children can learn social emotional skills that allow them to navigate their world. So by embedding a therapist at a childcare center, we start developing this relationship with the teachers where we help them identify challenges that they're facing in the childcare in their classroom, and techniques that they could use to promote problem solving skills, friendship skills, help children with transitions, how to manage very strong emotions. And that reduces the stress level that these educators manage, and also hopefully increases their understanding of what the emotional needs of kids and practices that could be effective, so they can have classrooms that are more peaceful, and that they don't need to end up having to ask a family to find another center. So at the childcare center, we can provide treatment for those children that the center identifies as needing our intervention, or we could do mental health consultation more in a preventive way to promote a cultural shift in terms of how to promote social emotional skills.
Good, really good.
It's really interesting in that the way we evaluate our preschools is through the learning gains, right? Can they identify a square? Can they begin to hear their sounds? We do not evaluate children on their emotional learning skills. That's not something we have done yet. And yet, the way we learn is through relationships. It is my relationship with my teacher, my willingness to please her is how I'm going to perform. And yet we're not evaluating our systems based on that. And so that really is kind of a movement that we try to educate the centers that we have, because one of the reasons why those kids are suspended or expelled at a much higher rate is because by law they don't have to serve them. So in the K-12 system, that they are required to serve every single kid. You don't have to do that in the pre-K environment. But if I'm being suspended from school to school, well, one, as a working parent, I may require my child to be in child care. So if I can't keep my child in the child care system, I'm at risk for losing my job, right? Which can affect our low-income families because they're more likely not to be able to sustain employment. So it can have a positive effect there. But the other aspect is that if I keep them in the school and they can have that relationship with their teacher, they will be better able to learn, so that they don't start kindergarten further behind. And those of you that are familiar with the whole Head Start movement, you know, the whole premise of Head Start was to give low-income children a head start to their education. And what's interesting is the research has shown is that those kids that complete Head Start, when they get into kindergarten, they are caught up. But by the time they reach third grade, they begin to lose all the gains that they have, and they now begin to go behind. And I would challenge the fact that it's because we're not focusing on that social emotional learning aspect. That we know that individuals, and I also would say that I think poverty is a symptom, it's not a problem. There is a reason why people are in poverty. The Harvard Child Development has a study in regards to social emotional development and trauma. And they identify 3 factors that how trauma affects children long and into adulthood. One is it impairs your ability to be able to learn, and there's a whole bunch of neuroscience that is behind that and how trauma affects the brain and your ability to learn. It affects your ability to be intimate or have loving relationships with other people, and it affects your ability to be able to regulate your emotions. And if we look at people who are in long-term, generational poverty, they have all 3 of those elements. So we can continue to focus on poverty, right? Give people money, we help them work, but if we're not addressing the emotional needs of those individuals, I would conjecture that we will continue to have generational poverty. And when we look at those families that we serve in the Protective Services Division, at least every kid that I have served, their parent was involved in the system as well. The #1 predictor for being in the system is having been in the system when you were a child. And so that's one of the things that we are desperately trying to work is that if I've got a parent who is impaired in their ability to be able to connect, trying to connect to a small child, likelihood that when that small child, he's not going to know or she's not going to know how to connect when they're adults. But by doing this child-parent psychotherapy work, this teaching them on how that serve and return works, to read those cues effectively, I can enhance that attachment. And then hopefully when they become adults, they will know how to have those relationships and therefore less likely to be in the system later on in life.
Now, a lot of people may be unaware, but how big is mental health in our communities?
Well, I think that actually is probably one of our problems. We actually are having issues related to capacity. We are struggling hiring qualified individuals because the need is so great.
Really?
We probably have, right now, we probably are serving about 1,300 active clients, and that goes down in the summertime. Probably at the height of this year, we probably were serving 1,600 active clients. And that's just Tykes and Teens. There are 6 other mental health organizations here on the Treasure Coast. All of us are providing mental health services. So the need is quite huge. And there are a ton of private practitioners out there as well. And yet, despite all of that, we struggle meeting the needs of the requests that we get for the services. Now, we do have some unique programming. Our infant mental health program, there is no one else on the Treasure Coast that does that. Requires a high level of training to get clinicians to be able to be aware of that. As you can imagine, reading a 10-month-old baby's cues is not easy to do. And it requires a lot of practice and supervision to be able to do it, which fortunately we've gotten some funders to be able to support us in training our staff to do that. So there's extra demand there that are not there, but it's a huge problem. The Surgeon General came out with a report about 10 years ago that stated that 25% of children will experience a significant mental health issue in their lifetime. So if you figure there are, 40,000 children in the St. Lucie County School District, if 25% of them will need services and while they're in school, that's 10,000 children. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of children.
That's a lot of children.
So, and not including their parents.
Yes. So what is child-parent psychotherapy?
So child-parent psychotherapy is an evidence-based therapeutic intervention specifically for children ages 0 to 5. It is what we call a dyadic intervention, because that means that we always see the child and the caregiver together in session. We are allowed to meet with the caregivers alone to address things that are more related to the adult world, right? But whenever we see the child, the caregiver is present, because again, it's attachment based. It's about the relationship and the connection. So the idea behind it is that the therapist is gonna help the caregiver become a therapeutic agent for their child by learning how to read those behavioral cues, exploring what the young child is trying to say through their behavior, what are their needs and their wants. Again, because even though we're genetically wired to do that, our experiences influence the lens that we use to read those behavioral cues.
Wow.
Yes.
Now, what kind of response have you been getting in the community about Tykes and Teens overall?
Well, I wanted to share that recently we applied for an Impact 100 grant here for St. Lucie County, and we were actually winners. And this actually has allowed us the opportunity to be able to open up an office here in St. Lucie County. So we will, in the fall, we will be opening an office in St. Lucie West. We have our infant mental health program that we are providing. We have another grant through Children's Services Council here in St. Lucie called the Trust Grant, where we're supporting after-school programs to be able to understand trauma, with the same primary goal as in our Child Center program, to keep kids in those after-school programs, right? It makes sense that if a kid is occupied in an after-school program, they're less likely to do something destructive out on the street, or be encouraged to participate in another community not so healthy connection, i.e. gangs. And so we're really working with those centers to be able to either help teach those learning skills or to be able to keep them in as opposed to kicking them out.
Great.
So it's been a positive relationship.
That's good. That's really good. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Really good conversation, and we definitely have to do this again.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.